Welcome to the Old School Food Freedom Podcast, brought to you by your friends at Finding Balance. I'm your host, Chrissy Kirkman. On this show, we kick it as old school as it gets with how God created us to live, free from dieting, food rules, and body shame. Ready to replace the old soundtrack of cultural lies with biblical truth? Let's start with this. You don't have to be trapped by food struggles. You were created to be free. God adores you and wants you to experience the fullness of life without body hatred or bondage to dieting. The time is now to take a step toward the life you were created for. We're so glad you're here with us today. Let's get into today's episode. Kirsten Schmidt is back with me today to talk about the very real struggle of information overload. You know, that constant flood of digital content that just leaves us feeling anxious and inadequate and disconnected from ourselves and from others, and especially from Jesus. Today, we're getting real about the pressures to, quote, know it all, the quick fix culture of social media, and much more. But more importantly, we're reminding ourselves, because Kirsten and I struggle too, that true wisdom comes from God, not just the latest trends. This episode is a gentle invitation to step back, seek balance, and make time with Jesus more important than endless scrolling. Hey, Kirsten, welcome back to the Old School Food Freedom Podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here again.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you back. We loved our 2-part episode previously. Friends, you can find the links in the show notes to listen to our conversation. Today, we are going to just go deep into this thing about information pollution, how to navigate digital clutter without losing yourself. This is a big deal. Okay, so here's the backstory. Kirsten did a post on Instagram that talked about this, kind of went through this, and I was like immediately in her DMs, like, this has to be an episode. This is so good. This is so much of my story of any time there was something going on, especially with food and body image stuff. I was going to Instagram. I was going to podcasts. I was going to audiobooks, anywhere I could go where I could just absorb and like digitally download into my brain. But often it's like it couldn't really soak in. Like my brain's a sponge, but either was soaking in too deep that then I couldn't find it again, or it was not really getting where it needed to go. And so we'll talk a little bit about that story. I'm sure Kirsten will share some things in her life, but how we can lose ourselves. This is the culture we live in, right? So again, no shame. If you feel something come up in you today that feels like, oh, that's me, I do this, and you start feeling shame or bad about yourself, that is not the intention of this episode. It's never the intention of our show at all, is to not make you feel bad about yourself and shame you into change, because that doesn't work. We've been there. We know it doesn't work. High diet culture shaming us for things that aren't even our fault. But these are indicators that maybe something is happening that isn't working for you, something that isn't enhancing your life or your walk with Jesus. Like, that's what it's about. And that can be a challenge too. So all of that to say, that's what we're talking about today. So first, I want to do a little bio of Kirsten. So Kirsten is a certified health coach specializing in behavior change and intuitive eating. She has 2 degrees, one in kinesiology and one in human nutrition. She founded Integro to help Christian women find identity in Christ, to walk confidently in their body, health, and food choices without dieting. She specializes in creating behavior change by getting to the root of the beliefs and behaviors that are keeping women stuck in dysfunctional cycles around health and body image. I've always loved that, Kirsten. She is also the host of the fantastic Abiding at the Table podcast. Y'all need to go listen. Link in the show notes. So if you are familiar with the show, you will know that normally on the Old School Food Freedom Podcast, we kick it off with a question of, what old school item or experience do you miss from back in the day? Kirsten has done that. But we have a story that's a throwback story I have been wanting to share, because this is just such a God thing. It's so cool. So Kirsten and I, in 2023, we were in Fort Worth, Texas at the Holy and Whole conference together. So much fun, had a blast, just praising the Lord and worshiping together and speaking and just being together, having community and connection. And at the end, of the conference. Everybody's gathered around. By then, I think it was dark outside, and we were all walking down this hallway. My team and I were about to leave, and Kirsten introduced me to her husband, Colin. And I was like, oh, hey, we had a little chat. Now, I live on the Missouri side. We're both in the Kansas City metro area. I'm on the Missouri side. Kirsten's on the Kansas side. A little fun fact. And so, like, Colin's super nice. I really liked his smile. He laughed. Like, it was just fun. I was like, oh, they make a cute couple, right? I think it was later I had posted, I think your episodes, they came after that conference. And so I'm posting about them. So our mutual friend that we didn't know was a mutual friend, Ian. He was like, oh my gosh, I know Kirsten. I love her. We went to K-State together. I was like, wait, you know her? Yeah. Her husband and I are really good friends. So my husband is Todd. You remember Todd even hunted with them. I was like, what? And so I'm flipping out. And I was like, Todd, do you know a guy named Colin that you would have hunted with Ian? He's like, oh, yeah, of course. He's like, you even met him. I was like, I'm screaming. What? They hunted somewhere together. And he was like, you remember, we came back. He stood in our driveway while we cleaned ducks and you came out and talked to him. And like all this stuff started coming back. And then I looked like, I don't know if I, stopped him or something. But I looked at him, I was like, oh my gosh, we had this whole 45-minute to an hour-long conversation in our driveway way before I knew you or met you. So it's a Friday evening and I immediately was blowing up your Instagram. I was like, Kirsten, I'm sorry. I know we're off work, but listen to this. And it was just, I don't know. What was it like on your side?
Yeah, it was amazing. And it's just so funny how, somehow you had met my husband and your husband and my husband's friend had all hunted together. When you started texting me that, I was just dying laughing. And I started talking to my husband about it. He was dying laughing. It was just such a funny coincidence that we had all kind of known each other before we even knew that we knew each other.
So cool. Is that not God, how he works? Just something, What does that mean? I don't know. I just think it shows is it a small world and a big world, right? But anyway, that was a fun throwback story for you, how God just does cool things.
Yeah, it was so amazing.
And somehow I navigated all the Instagram digital clutter to get into your DMs and tell you that story. So, gosh, Kirsten, just start us out. What would you want us to know to set the stage of what we're talking about today?
Yeah, well, probably just kind of defining what information pollution is. And it's a real thing that is starting to be researched more now. The gist of it is that it's convincing noise. It's information that could be irrelevant to you or God's purpose on your life. It could be contradictory. It could be redundant, low value, false, confusing. But mostly it's just never ending. It's just a never ending constant flow of information. If you go to a lot of websites online, they're going to define information pollution as an abundance of false or misleading information. But I would take that one step further as a Christian and say that it's any information that is just not relevant for what God is calling you to steward in that season of your life. And it can cause all kinds of problems, which we will definitely talk about some of the issues with information pollution. But we have more access to information than ever before. And I don't know that it's really helping us. In some ways it's helpful, but in a lot of ways it's actually harmful because we wind up relying more on this constant flow of worldly information rather than God's wisdom. And I think there's a lot more research coming out that really just backs up why information pollution is not a good thing for any type of goal that you may have for your life.
What is interesting to me about this, and I've thought about this for years, but now it feels even worse because I, too, deal with this on a daily basis. I think I've probably always had an Apple phone, Apple brand. And so when I think of the logo of the apple on my phone, and I think of the Garden of Eden, and I think about how this phone in my hand just fills my brain with info. Just like you were like the convincing noise. It's never ending. And just the similarities of Eve in the garden and the enemy tempting her. Like, did God really say that? And the whole knowledge, wanting knowledge. Is he withholding something from us? What do you need to know that you're not in the know of? I mean, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I feel the connection often, and it feels overwhelming to not, like, sometimes to just feel like I know I'm sitting here looking at things that don't enhance my life. Sometimes they're funny and they make me laugh, and that feels like an enhancement. And maybe at the time it is, but then I want more, and I just keep scrolling and scrolling for more funny things. And then sometimes they're really inappropriate. And I was like, I don't want to hear that and see that. Or I don't know.
Yeah.
Help. I feel overwhelmed just talking about it.
Yeah. It's so funny that you actually mentioned the fall, because that was one thing I wanted to talk about, because there's obviously psychological aspects to information pollution, but we really can trace this all the way back to the fall. And I love doing that. Even on the last podcast I was on with you, we talked about how body shame can be traced all the way back to the fall, but so can information pollution, because you're right. When the serpent asked Eve, did God really say you can't eat from any tree? And so right away, he's trying to twist truth. He's trying to twist what God actually said.
Yeah.
And Eve does correct him. She's like, well, no, he just said we can't eat from this particular tree. We can eat from any of the other trees. And the serpent continues to kind of question God and actually provide new and very enticing information that holds some measure of truth, but he has distorted that truth so that now it's deceptive, but believable. It has to have some measure of truth for us to really believe it. And he says, well, you certainly will not die, which was kind of true in the sense that God didn't mean if they ate that fruit, there was going to be a literal death. So the serpent says, well, you certainly will not die, for God knows that when you eat of the fruit, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And so it says in the Bible, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree of good and evil was pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took it and she ate it. And so ultimately she wanted more knowledge in order to gain more control. And that is the crux of information pollution. We have really been convinced by society that the more you know, the more you'll be in control of your life. Therefore, the more success you'll have, the less shame you'll feel, the less likely that bad things are going to happen in your life. And knowledge is not inherently bad. Knowledge can actually be a really, really good gift from God. But we have to be seeking knowledge from the correct heart posture, and we're not supposed to know it all. Only God.
Wait, pause. What? I'm not supposed to know everything?
Surprise, surprise. We kind of try to be like God in that way, because God alone holds the fullness of truth. And we are supposed to seek after truth, but nowhere does it say that we need to know every bit of knowledge that ever existed in order to follow Jesus. If we knew everything, we wouldn't actually even need faith.
Wow. Yeah.
So we have to make sure that we're seeking knowledge from the right heart posture. So if despair or hopelessness or confusion, overwhelm, anxiety, if any of those things are fruits of your quest for information, then you know right away that your heart posture in seeking the information is not in the right place. And another key factor where you know you are not seeking information from the correct heart posture is if it never feels like you can gain enough. If it feels like no matter how much information you learn about your health or about finances or whatever it might be, you still always feel like you lack enough information to make any real impact on your life. You always feel behind. You never feel content with what information God has given you, and you don't know how to steward the information that you currently have.
Yeah.
So that's a really big sign there.
We create these little folders and we put things in for later and little templates that maybe we'll one day use, and they just remain and they get dusty, air quotes. You know, we know that they're there, but when we go back, it's like, I don't even know where to start with all of this. It's too much. It's overwhelming. So then I don't do anything. I say we, but it's just, for sure, it's me. It's overwhelming. You said something about fruits. but like fruits need roots, right? To grow. You mentioned in that Instagram post, information pollution prevents root cause solutions. So let's go there when we're talking about roots, root cause solutions.
Yeah. So one thing that happens when you get on social media is it's a single post or reel that the reel is only going to be about 90 seconds long. The post can only have, short phrases if it's like a carousel post to keep people's attention, but it's never going to be nuanced enough. It's never going to be detailed or unique enough to actually name, address, or heal your very, very unique root cause of whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. So it's going to force you to rely on very quick judgments and assumptions rather than curated information, curated assessments that are specific to your history, your needs, your circumstances, and also just your season of life. So I made a post here recently talking about how the exact same health advice could be helpful for one person, but really harmful for somebody else. So if you struggle with emotional overeating, numbing your emotions with a really big bowl of ice cream might not be the healthier option in that moment. But for a woman overcoming diet culture or orthorexia, eating a big bowl of ice cream might be one of the healthiest things she can do for herself. And for a lot of people, they struggle with both. That woman's going to need even more like fine-tuned advice than anything you're ever going to get on social media. And obviously, I have social media. I make posts like this because they're not all bad. I know that those posts can be somewhat helpful. I know that someone who's engulfed, say, in diet culture, if they just happen to come across a post that really speaks to them, that might be a tipping point for them to start looking into intuitive eating or looking into just non-diet ways to steward their body. But if they're wanting to actually get help with learning to steward their body, with overcoming body shame, with healing deep wounds or the root cause of their binge eating or whatever it might be, social media isn't going to be the thing that's going to fix that. There's not going to be any kind of quick fix. It's going to take a lot of in-depth conversations. It's going to take relationship with somebody that has walked that path and that God has led you to for them to help you. It's going to take some failure. It's going to take some trial and error. You're not going to find the deep help that you need from a post. And information pollution really doesn't allow for any gray area. And that gray area exists in healing our relationship with food and body. It exists in any type of goal that you're looking to achieve. It's just not black and white, but social media does a really good job of convincing you that the solution is black and white, that it's very straightforward, that you just need to follow these very easy steps, and then you'll reach all your goals. But that is just not how it works. And I think marketers really know psychology. They know how the human brain works. Yeah. They know that the human brain hates gray area. We really like quick, easy fixes. We like to feel in control. We like things to be very straightforward.
Oh, hi, diet culture.
Yes, the diet culture to a T.
Hello.
Yeah, we want this set of rules to follow because it feels easier. There's no unknown there. There's no place where maybe you feel unsure. It's just like, oh, I just followed the set of rules. And so we don't like to not fully understand something. So social media and really just anything, TV, there's documentaries, even like some podcasts, very influential speakers, they know how to play into that part of our flesh and that part of our psychology that desires to have this black and white quick fix in order to get you to buy something. Because at the end of the day, that is really what's fueling information pollution, is consumerism and feeling like you can buy something in order to fix everything. Now, there's nothing wrong in investing in your health or investing in someone trying to help you or finding a mentor or anything like that. But there's a difference between someone being really, really good at manipulating information in order to get you to pay for something that they're offering versus God leading you to somebody that can help you.
Yes. Huge difference. Hey there. I'm so grateful that you are here and listening to the Old School Food Freedom Podcast. As always, you can find helpful links from today's episode in the show notes. I want to personally thank those of you who make this podcast possible. For over 20 years, Finding Balance has been helping people walk in freedom by finding Jesus in their struggles with food and body image. If you'd like to join others in supporting this ongoing work, you can do so in one of three ways. 1, leave a comment and review for the podcast on your preferred podcast app. 2, share the podcast with your network and friends on social media or via text and email. 3, this podcast is made possible because of generous donors. If you'd like to make a tax-deductible donation or become a monthly supporter, you can do so at findingbalance.com/donate. Our key scripture, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. Galatians 5:1.
We know that in social media, the videos and the people that are going to get the most attention are going to be the ones that present information in a way that sounds novel. So we also like new information that still goes along with our core set of beliefs. So that's why it always seems like there's new information constantly coming out on social media, because if someone can present information in a way that you've never heard before, that's going to spark your interest. That's going to grab your attention, especially if they use the right language, especially if they use words like toxic or poisonous or stop doing this because it's ruining your health or whatever. They know kind of the trigger words that they need to use, and then they know how to present information that maybe has been presented over and over and over again for the last 50 years, but they know how to present it in a way that sounds novel. So it seems like, oh, this is the information that I've been lacking that's been getting in the way of me achieving my goals. So I can give an example of, I recently saw something that said, do you struggle with fatigue? Because a lot of people do nowadays. And it says, well, if you struggle with fatigue, this is why. And it starts presenting some information that sounds new. It sounds novel. And it sounds very, very convincing because they know how to present information in a way that sounds convincing. And then they'll say that, the reason you feel tired all the time is because you're deficient in this essential mineral. But if you buy, my expensive salt or my expensive supplement, then you won't feel tired anymore. And so your brain starts to think, oh, the reason I felt tired is because I lacked this piece of information. Because we believe that the reason we don't achieve our goals is because we lack the right information. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about self-sabotage, but that's not necessarily true. So when someone presents you new information, you automatically think that is the information I'm missing. Now that I have this information, I'll achieve my goals. So you buy the thing, it doesn't really work. And so you go back on social media and someone uses the same formula to present you with a new solution. And you think, oh, that's the same formula. That's the information I was missing. Now that I have the information, it'll fix all my problems. And so we kind of get on this cycle of believing that the reason I haven't achieved my goals is simply because I haven't found the right information. And that is a really huge problem with social media, because social media is constantly, nonstop presenting what seems like new information all the time. Except for if you're tired, the solution isn't going to be something that you can quickly buy on social media, more than likely. It could be because your parents put way too much pressure on you as a kid to be perfect, and now you're like a people-pleasing perfectionist who never rests, and that's why you're tired all the time, not because you're not buying this expensive salt. And so there's a lot more deep work there that's going to have to be done that we typically are very resistant to, because we know doing the deep work requires vulnerability.
Come on with it. That is so good. Also, we just spent hours mindlessly scrolling, and our brains are fatigued after a full day of work or school, or we should be studying, or all the things. And that is exhausting. And we have different things going on in our bodies, our health, a million different potential reasons we could feel tired and exhausted. but somehow that just goes out the window. And we're like, oh, this is a potential solution to this struggle that I'm feeling in the moment, even. Like, oh my gosh.
Yes.
I'm going to be honest and say, even as I'm hearing you share these things, I'm noticing everything that you've said is just totally true in my everyday life of like just feeling like there's so much information and I need to make sure I tap on everyone's story so I can get through and clear that little. I'm sorry if you're not on Instagram, this is maybe not, but if you're on Facebook, there are all those stories that go along and I want to have those cleared out. So it's like I have checked them off my list, but no matter how many times I've cleared them, there's always new ones being added. And so I will unfollow some things or mute stories that it's like, do I really care about this brand's story? Like I don't need, so I will try to help myself, but then there's always another little area that I get sidetracked in or railroaded. I don't know. As I'm hearing you share these things, I am feeling shame. And so that's the indicator that I don't need to feel shame. I am just learning new things and really hearing from someone else explain the things that I feel and haven't really put words to. Of like, on one hand, I'm just hating that it's like this, that I can't seem to put my phone down, that when my phone isn't in my hand and I'm doing something, what do I do with my thoughts? I don't like that I've gotten to that point, but I don't need to feel shame. I just need to know it just doesn't feel good for my soul. Like this doesn't feel good. This isn't how I want to feel, where I can't even be alone with my thoughts in the bathtub when that's all we knew in the past. And I would think of things and I would talk to God in those moments. He would give me neat ideas or whisper things, show me things. So I feel like it's another tool that the enemy uses to get us distracted, get us separated in our relationship with the Lord. Something I have noticed that I don't like is if my husband and I are sitting on the sofa and we've got some show going and it's just, we're done with work, we're just kind of winding down. And yet we've both been on our phone sitting next to each other for like easily an hour, 2 hours. When I see that that is happening, I'm not shaming him. I'm not shaming myself. It's like, this is not okay. Look what's happening. Like, I love you. It's okay for us to sit here and watch a show together and talk about it, but not be completely miles away doing things that just don't matter. Like when I think of it in those terms, and then I think about my relationship with Jesus, it just breaks my heart. So I don't want that distraction. Again, friends, this is just for us to become aware and enlightened of a tool that the enemy uses to get us disconnected. And now that we know, we can actually take steps toward a way to change it, right?
Absolutely. I think anybody out there, if you're feeling shame, a lot of times shame comes from either comparison, which leads to this feeling of lack, like I lack something that I should have. And I can tell you the only reason I can even talk about this is because I currently struggle with this. It is one of the hardest things of anything I've had to try to overcome. I actually think that information pollution is harder for me to overcome than my eating disorder, which might not be true for everybody, but I definitely feel like that's true for me because it is so tempting and so constant. And there is kind of this fear that I'm going to miss out on information. I'm going to miss out on something really important. And if I miss out on that, that's going to harm me in my life somehow. And so there's this deep feeling of lack that usually leads to this overconsumption of information. And then usually we feel shame because there's part of us that knows this isn't right, but yet I don't feel like I'm strong enough to overcome it. And what I have found is the best remedy when you feel that shame. And I think we talked about this last time. Shame isn't something we want to feel, but it is a really good indicator that something's off.
Yes.
And so when you feel that shame, then what I like to do is just tell God, Lord, I've failed. I am at the end of myself. I am really struggling to overcome this temptation. I need your help. So every time you feel that shame, what shame does is it wants to pull your attention away from God and onto yourself and say, how do I muster up the willpower to just fix this? Or you feel so shamed that you just feel hopeless and it's like, whatever, I'm scrolling anyways. I might as well keep going. But instead, just be really open and honest with God and say, Lord, I tell God all the time, I have failed, which means I've come to the end of myself. But when you come to the end of yourself, when you fail, that is where Jesus is. The end of yourself is where Jesus is. And so it's the best opportunity to turn to Jesus in humility. And the more that you do that, even if it feels like you're not overcoming this temptation often to just scroll endlessly, the more you can pause and turn to Jesus in that humility and say, I'm at the end of myself, Lord, I need your strength, the more you're going to find his strength over time.
And being real. Like the more we hide, the less we heal. We feel that we're hiding from God, but we're not. Like he sees it. And he's not just like looking down and just stern and angry. Like that's not the God we serve at all. And to bring it to the light, to step into that. And thank you for saying that this is a struggle for you, because it was even hard for me. I just think, listener, friend, you need to know that you're not alone in this. And just because we have podcasts or have these businesses, organizations, like we're doing these things, it doesn't mean that we're not impacted by it either. Like it's a struggle for us. And I see why people do social media detox, like where they just, we cure our social media feed because it's feeding us. We're consumers, we're consuming it, but also to just like, I'm taking a break. And I've not heard anything bad with the people who I've talked to. Nothing bad has come from taking that break. I only hear these good reports. Now, do what you want to do with that. But as I scroll, I'm sitting, I'm not moving as much because that phone and whatever that information is too important to me. So what if I sit it down and walk away from it? What if, as the weather gets nicer, I'm taking a walk without actually listening to a podcast? What if I actually don't bring earbuds? What if I just keep my phone in my pocket just for safety's sake? Or a timer if I need to be back at a certain time, and I'm just walking. My eyes are open so I can see what's around me, like old school style. Like we didn't have cell phones all the time. Is it enough to be with Jesus? Is it enough to look at the goodness around us? Look at what he's made. And also, friends, I want you to know, when I was praying circles around my food struggles, my body image struggles, I was seeking Jesus in the middle of it through Instagram, through podcast. That's how he led me to finding balance. When I got to finding balance, I saw his truth. And did I see it other places? Eventually, but somehow finding balance is where it felt like an answer to my prayer. Because now I really see truth and how the enemy had been lying and is twisting things. And they were just like putting it out there. And I was like, let's go. Like, this is it. But at some point, I could not just keep consuming old posts. Like, I knew I had to take a step. And for me, it was getting into the Lasting Freedom community and taking the course. And so I had to step out and pray. Lord, you know our financial situation right now, and we don't have that extra money. I see that this feels like what I need in my life right now. You've led me here, but I don't know how to make that happen. And my hands are up and my worries are down. And if this is meant to be, this is where you want me, then you'll make a way. Bakaraki, he made a way. He made a way. And look where we are now. Because I had to take that next step. So don't hear us say we're just condemning all social media and shaming. Obviously, we're not. It's we want to help you find balance in that area. And you don't have to come to Finding Balance. Maybe Integro is the right program for you. Maybe it's something different. There are community groups. Maybe your first step is prayer@findingbalance.com and you send us an email that says, I heard this podcast episode and I'm struggling here. Can you pray for me? Our prayer team will pray for you. So yeah, back to you, Kirsten. What else? I know we're getting toward the end of our time, but what else would you want to say?
Well, I like that you brought that up, even just prayer, because I think we are more quickly drawn to our phone than to prayer when we're struggling with something. I was reading the Bible the other day, and I came across a verse that I've come across multiple times that I didn't understand. I felt like it was a contradictory verse to the rest of Jesus's teachings, and I can't remember which one it was. But I've always been confused by it, and so I've always just kind of skipped past it. But this time I'm like, well, I really want to know what Jesus meant here. And so my first reaction was to Google it.
Yeah.
And I just heard Jesus say, stop, like put your phone down. Why don't you just ask me? And so I did. And I said, okay, I'm going to sit here in silence. I'm going to ask Jesus, and I'm going to see what comes up for me. And an answer came up. So it still takes discernment then, because sometimes it's our own thought. Sometimes you know for sure when it's God, but other times it's like, well, is that me or is that God? Or, what's this voice in my head? And so then I went to my phone to a website that I really, really trust to seek more information through that discernment process. And it was exactly what Jesus had given me, just in way more detail. Jesus gave me an answer, but it was way more simple and straightforward. And the website gave a much, much more detailed answer. And I just thought, we have lost our wonder. We have lost our ability to not know something and to wait on the Lord to inform us.
Yes.
There was actually a monk from, I think he was alive during like a really, really bad time in history.
Yeah.
And someone was asking him, like, this has to be the worst time in history to be alive. And he had prophesied that actually, he said, sometime in the future will be one of the hardest times for Christians to be alive, and not necessarily because of persecution, but because of distraction. That we will be constantly pulled to be distracted from God because it'll be so easy to find pleasure and comfort. I don't know that he necessarily said information, but still information, that we are constantly being pulled from the greatest source of wisdom that we have, Jesus, the only fullness of truth that we have, Jesus. There was a time when if you didn't know something, you couldn't just look it up.
Right.
You could maybe ask somebody, but then there you're building relationship.
Yeah.
But now we're actually really afraid of the unknown. We're afraid of waiting on an answer, and we're afraid of gray area. And I think that's why, to your point, if God leads you to a community, or he leads you to a person or a mentor, whoever, you have to recognize that that is relationship that's leading to information, not a phone that's always leading to information. Again, it's not that social media is all bad or any of that stuff, but if your main source of information lacks relationship, then there's a problem there, because we are made for relationship first with Jesus, first with God, and then with everybody else. Those are the two most important reasons that we are on this earth. And so that is where a lot of our source of information needs to come from. So I'll just say this, like one last little quick thing. One of the signs of information pollution is that it leads to impaired decision-making, low motivation, and this overall sense of negativity. It can also increase stress and anxiety. Almost everybody that I know that has a goal is feeling that right now. They're feeling like it's impossible to make a decision. They're feeling a sense of overall negativity with their life or with where they're going. And one thing that we have to recognize, our brains prefer information consumption over taking action. Because as long as you're consuming information, you can't fail consuming information.
True.
The second you take an action, there's a risk of failure. And I think we're so afraid of failure that we would rather sit in information consumption world. But when it comes to self-sabotage, we know that information doesn't lead to sustainable action. I think the problem is we believe that if I can gain enough information, then when I do take action, I won't fail.
Yes. Oh, it's like a safety net.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've just woven our own safety net around it. But is it really safe? Like
Exactly.
Wow.
So I think information pollution is one of the leading causes of self-sabotage because we gain as much information as possible. And then we think, I'm going to apply all this information right away, right now. And half of it, God doesn't even want for you. It's not even for you. And the other half is just too much all at once. And then we self-sabotage. And then we go back to that same formula of, okay, the reason I failed is because I lack information. So you consume. And this whole time, God's over here saying, put it down and seek me first and allow me to guide you slowly. He's not going to do it quickly, usually. It is a slow process where you don't see the whole path and you're not going to know it all. You're only going to know your very next step. And there's a lot of faith that is needed there because it's scary, because you feel like you're walking in the dark, but that's really what we need.
And I love that you said it's slow, it's gentle, and feels risky, feels scary, but taking that first step and then the next step, just one step at a time, that's how we pull away from the self-sabotage and the overwhelm and digital cluttering our brains into connection with Jesus and into more on the path that he's leading us to, that he wants us to go. And Kirsten, thank you for sharing all of this. Friends, if you're feeling like, I don't even know what the next step is to take, again, you can send us a prayer at findingbalance.com. We have a prayer group community that you can get in connection with. If you're not sure about your struggles with food and body, there's a self-test that you can take, all kinds of resources. And then go to Kirsten's website, listen to her podcast, but only if that feels gentle.
Yes.
If any of this that we're saying is something that God is leading you to, like, don't just do it because we said, go to our, we need, downloads. No, that's not what this is about for either of us. If you feel Jesus leading you, if it feels gentle, if it feels like something that can help you get to a place of connection and real growth and change, then maybe that's the right thing. Kirsten, would you wrap us up today with praying over our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. Jesus, we know that you are the source of all truth. You said that if any of you is lacking wisdom, ask God who gives to all generously. There is no lack in your kingdom, that you know exactly what we need when we need it. You told your disciples to not worry about what they are to say because the Holy Spirit will give them everything they need, that it is the Holy Spirit who speaks through them, not their knowledge. We know that you chose illiterate fishermen to be your first apostles because you knew that it doesn't take someone with a high IQ. It doesn't take us knowing every little bit of information to serve you and to steward what you are calling us to steward and to build relationship. Jesus, I ask that you would just cast out anything that would cause pressure or shame or confusion or overwhelm to the listeners as they hear this podcast. And I ask that you would just fill their hearts with all of the fruits of your Spirit, and that when you speak to them, it would be followed by peace and not a pressure to know more and consume more, that you would just gently guide them one step at a time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for listening to the Old School Food Freedom Podcast. For over 20 years, Finding Balance has been helping people walk in freedom by discovering where Jesus fits into their struggles with food and body image. If you want more biblical truth and encouragement, head on over to FINDINGbalance.com and subscribe to our free daily vitamin devotional. While you're there, explore our Christ-centered Lasting Freedom online course and small group tools. You can help keep this ministry going by donating today at FINDINGbalance.com. See you next time. The content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, or prescribe a particular course of action. If you have or suspect you may have an eating disorder, please consult your healthcare provider. If you desire to receive faith-based care, visit ChristianTreatmentFinder.com to browse professionals with a Kingdom campaign against eating disorders.